joined by my colleague, Lynn Varecchia here. My name is Tom McHugh. We're both members of the Holy Cross Admission Office, and excited to host this session tonight, as this is something that reading applications is something that we do by ourselves. So it feels like we've been practicing for this for years and years. We're like athletes who are finally in a game in front of a crowd. So just a couple of housekeeping items to mention. We do have closed captioning. You can hit the live transcript button if you do want this, some closed captions. And we also will be recording this session. This is the 5th of 5 webinars. So this will be able to be watched on our website afterwards. And as you can see, we will just launch a poll at the start of this. So you can take some time to fill those questions out, and we can talk about the results as time goes by. And final housekeeping item, you can feel free to use the Q&A function to ask us any questions throughout the session if you need something clarified or wondering if you need some more details on anything that we mentioned. So we'll provide some time at the end for that. So without further ado, I'll have my colleague Lynn bring up the application and share her screen, and then we're excited to give you this inside look here into application review. So the first thing that we just wanted to draw your attention to here, so this is the screen that all of us counselors see. And Lynn, I'll just have you zoom in a little bit. Perfect. Slate is the system that we use and that a lot of other colleges use to do a lot of our admissions work. And just wanted to draw your attention to the left side of the screen. You'll see under the word Slate that there's a number of tabs, and we intentionally order these tabs and we're going to go in this order as we're looking at the application. So this first tab here is going to be a student's transcripts and some information about the high school that they attend. You'll also notice recommendations, interviews. We have a Holy Cross optional response that students can submit, as well as student correspondence, different email communications that we've shared with students. And the student's actual application happens to be the last thing that we read, not because it's least important, but because it really brings the whole application together. We read the essay as the last piece, as kind of the cherry on top or the exclamation point to a student's application. So we'll start off chronologically and just take a look at this school report. So Lynn, I'll loop you into the conversation. I think I've done enough talking for now. When you're looking at a student's application, you open up this academic section. What are you looking for in a student's school report? What information is contained here?
Yeah, so a number of things. There's a lot of information. So the school report is something that all school counselors would fill out and is submitted to us with any transcript. So it's a really nice key along with the school profile to give us information about the student, but also the context of the school. So the context is really the pieces that we're going to be zeroing in on. So the first thing that I would zero in on this first page would be looking at what's the scale of this GPA? Is it a weighted or an unweighted GPA? We often are given information about the GPA of the highest GPA for students in the graduating class. Most students are not that student, so it's okay that GPA is higher than yours, but it gives us some context of how competitive your school might be. So that is certainly something that I zero in on. And then, I was already on the second page there, Tom. We also would have information here about what courses are available at your school. So this is really helpful because we're not just going in and saying we want to see a student has taken all these honors classes, all these AP classes, if that's not something that's been available to you. So this part here where it says curriculum is really helpful to us to understand what might have been available to a student at their school. Those are the things I would jump in first. Do you want to just mention sort of on the right side here what this would be?
Definitely. So that's called our reader sheet. That's how we refer to it, at least. So this is not the way that it's always been. I know in years past, people, counselors were actually writing down the information, but this is where we're taking notes as we're reading a student's application. So you'll see things like program offered. So that is where counselors will be noting, different areas of challenging curriculum that's offered. And you'll notice that some of these things are pre-populated. So because our system is able to do a little bit of reading for us with some of the statistical info. We do have the GPA type as weighted, the GPA listed there, but there's certainly a lot here that we're going to want to fill in ourselves as well. So all of those different GPA scales that we have to choose from. So that just gives you a sense of how different all of the high schools are throughout the country. And we don't see a lot of schools that rank students at this point. Sometimes there's a range that's provided, but it does allow us to note if a rank is provided to us, if it's weighted, unweighted, or if there's no rank at all. And this is where we spend the bulk of our work. I'd say this is probably the section that requires the most attention to detail here. So, and Lynn is going to fill in here while I'm talking. We're going to go grade by grade as a counselor, just to note how many classes a student is taking in the academic subjects. So those will be history, English, natural science, mathematics, and foreign language. So the student is taking 6 classes each and every year of their high school experience because they've doubled up on foreign languages oftentimes. We'll also make note of any of the rigorous courses that they have in any given year. So you'll see 1 advanced, 1 AP, and we make note of the grades that students are receiving. So it doesn't have to be the exact grade per se, but 3 A's, 3 B's, or 4 A's, 2 B's. You'll notice that in the spring of their sophomore year, they received all passing grades, and we can kind of connect the dots there and think that was likely related to the pandemic. So that is information that we're well equipped to handle. So we've kind of marked their grades as what's listed here. In their first semester, they got 4 A's, 2 B's, and then for their second semester, they had all passing grades. So this information is ultimately all going to get translated into a dashboard and look a little bit prettier for the entire admission staff to look at. But we have 2 separate counselors that scour this information to make sure that it's accurate. And I heard from a little birdie that the poll results are in, so we'll just take a second to look at the poll results. So some thoughts on how many applications admission counselors read in a day. The majority is spot on. Yeah, 30 to 50 applications, depending on the time of year, is pretty standard. So that's during the months for us of November, December, and January, where we're doing this on a daily basis. And then how many admission counselors read each application? This was a tie in the results, it looks like. And I guess both are kind of correct in some ways. 2 different counselors read each application at Holy Cross, but then there are more eyes on it through our committee process as well. So 2 individual reads and then kind of a team read. So we'll give full credit to all the respondents there. I suppose I'm able to, Drew, are you able to? Oh, I can do that myself. There we go. What do you think will be the single most important part of your application review? Yeah, some acknowledgement of the first 2 results here, GPA and course schedule, essay, but you're right, with holistic admissions, all of these things are important, and we're certainly going to touch on everything tonight. And then what is our favorite committee snack? So the committee that we have is usually in person, and we look forward to when that can happen again. So these are all definitely things that are in our committee room that we grab on certain days, but yeah, definitely it depends on the days.
Yeah, it depends on the day. I think really just means all of the above, right?
It's true.
And then
that was the all of the above option. Lynn, I don't know if you wanted to add anything at this point, just in the transcripts and school profile section.
Well, I was going to ask you how you might describe this transcript that we're looking at.
Clean, nice. Yeah, it's not something that I anticipated getting into admissions, but there are like entire states and school systems that I like have different feelings about now because of how messy their transcripts are. But this is ideal. It is very symmetrical and easy to read. So if there's any high school superintendents or powers that be on this is what we like to look for.
And certainly those messy transcripts don't impact the student in any way. So this process that we just did of filling in the read in terms of the students' grades throughout the 4 years, it might go a little quicker on a transcript like this than on one that is, 20 pages long and has lots of superfluous information, is a little bit harder to read, but that's really part of our job to understand and to it takes a little more detective work for some transcripts than for others, but this one's nice and clean. And then now that we filled this in, what I would do here is I would just sort of sum up the sort of what we would consider the more rigorous courses a student has taken. Honors and AP are most common, but in this case, I would just change this to advanced. And in some cases, a student might also have some IB courses or some college courses. We can add those things as well. So it gives us a little bit of a snapshot of the students' total, sort of the courses they're enrolled in overall, but we certainly are still going to be looking year by year, course by course, grade by grade. So the snapshot is something that helps us, but then we can also come back to this transcript and really look at sort of the progression that a student has made.
Yeah, and this will all make sense a little bit later as we go through the first read, the second read, and what it looks like on the committee ends. And that is a good thing to note, is that we are going to have kind of that cheat sheet of the two readers who went through the application with a fine-tooth comb, but then we are also able to dive into the entire file at any point. So as questions come up, we can look in. So we've now moved from the school report to the transcript, and this is what we call the school profile. And some may know, some might not, that this is a readily accessible document for the vast majority of high schools, where you can get it in your college counseling office usually, or it might be on your school's website. And if the transcript is a map, this is kind of the key that helps us to decode things. So it gives us context. There's that word again, to what it is we're looking at. And you'll notice that a number of things are highlighted. So we're able to kind of let things pop and jump out to say, all right, this is valuable information for us about school closures due to COVID. On the first page of the school profile, there was also information about specific classes. So, all right, this school offers all honors courses, a limit on AP courses, and then there's advanced courses within mathematics and some other subjects. So, Lynn, any thoughts on this school profile or what we saw towards the end to the school report?
Just that the school profile is really important, and it's the place we turn to when we have unanswered questions. We never make decisions with questions still lingering. So this is often a first place we will check. All schools have this document. Many students are not aware that it exists, but it really is that key to understanding your school and your transcript. If we don't find it in your application, which is pretty rare, we will look for it on your school's website. We will call your school counselor. We'll do what we need to do to get the information that we need. Just moving through the read sheet, you see this box here that says program details. And this is just a catch-all box, a place for a counselor or reader to add any additional context. We're going to use that word a lot. So eat a Cheez-It every time you hear the word context. But the program details, we use it for all sorts of things. One might be that, if there's, particularly at a school, say if your school offers APs, but they offer very few, maybe they offer 5 APs, but 4 of them are in foreign language. Most students don't take more than 1 foreign language in high school, and many don't make it to the AP level in a foreign language anyway. So it's interesting information if 4 out of the 5 AP classes are in foreign language, because you wouldn't be expected that you would reach that level in more than 1 language. Sometimes we will indicate, which IB or college courses. If a student had a dual enrollment course, we might enter in where they took those courses or something like that. So sometimes this box is left blank, but it's really nice to have some order to the read, where you have specific information that go in specific boxes, but then also a place for counselors to add anything additional that they want the committee to see. You want me to move into testing here, Tom?
Yeah, that sounds great.
So AP scores, we do not load them automatically into the application. This is where a counselor would enter if a student had AP or IB scores really listed often on a transcript. They might list those scores here. This is separate from, say, SAT or ACT scores. As many of you may know, Holy Cross is test optional. So if a student opts to submit their standardized test scores, they would have an additional tab. You'll notice along the left side here, there's nothing about test scores. There's an entirely separate tab that appears if a student says yes to having their test scores considered on their application, and it disappears if the student says no. So many of you who wonder, well, oh, I sent my scores, or how are you going to know not to use my scores? That place on the application where you say yes or no, that triggers everything. So even if you change your mind at some point in the process, if you let us know, we'll make sure that that information does or does not display to our readers, regardless of whether maybe it's there, even if you said no. So that testing would be listed already on the application if the student had opted to submit their scores. So what's this big box down here, Tom? What are we going to do with this big box?
Yeah, we are through the quantitative information at this point in many ways and moving on to more of the qualitative information. So now that we've gotten past a student's transcripts and all of their school information, which is really vital to the read, now we're getting into kind of the meat and potatoes. So these tabs, as I said, are ordered based on a lot of thought by us, and then the documents within these tabs are actually ordered as well. So we're going to be looking just quickly at some of the different kinds of recommendations that we receive. This happens to be the recommendation from the school counselor. And the reason that this is placed first is because it's really the job of high school counselors to provide to us a full picture of who you've been within the high school community. So it really paints this wonderfully well-rounded picture and usually adds some great details to what we've just seen in your transcripts. And Lynn we've done a little bit of the work ahead of time, so she is not that fast of a typer, although she's pretty fast. But just wanted to give you a sense of, in this comments box, the types of things that we're going to be looking for and pulling out. So Lynn's currently looking at what we would call an other recommendation, which is from someone outside of your school community, a research mentor. So we sift through each and every one of these. This is written in Latin. I can't read that, but maybe someone in the audience can. And we're going to be adding, we can't obviously capture every single thing that's mentioned in each and every recommendation, but after reading through, we try to summarize it, pull out important details and quotes, and give other staff members the essence of what's being said and kind of the relationship that the recommender has to this individual. So Lynn, what do you look for in recommendations?
Yeah, so obviously, students can't control what their recommenders will write, but knowing what kind of things we're looking for, it might help you as you think about who would be the most appropriate recommenders. The most effective recommendations for me are the ones where it's clear that there is some relationship, even if it's just that you sit in that person's class. It doesn't need to be that you know them in any other context, but that you really have spent time with this person and they know you in some real way. Those recommenders are really able to paint a picture and tell a story. So the recommendations that just recite the things we already see on the application, it can be a red flag if your recommender says, well, I can't write your letter until you give me your resume. That can be a really good starting point for them to be reminded maybe of some of your involvement. Your school counselor would certainly want that information from you, but a teacher or a neighbor or a friend or a supervisor for volunteer experience, what they should be doing is telling us what their experience has been like with you. So what they know about you, what they have seen of you, and it doesn't require them to recite your GPA, the courses you've taken, your resume, and so on and so forth. So we already have that information. And I think it's important, particularly when if you seek additional letters of recommendation, to keep in mind the information that we already have, and that we don't need someone to tell us that you are class president. But if they can tell us about how they were in the room when you made your speech and how impressed they were, or that they've seen you do things for your class that they've never seen someone else do before, or that you just have such a different way of doing things that's uniquely you, then that is really useful. So it's not just fact, it's experience, it's subjective, it's what they know of you. Because I could write you a letter of recommendation just by reading your extracurricular page or reading your resume, and that is not helpful because I don't know you at all yet. So that's what I look for, is sort of evidence that the person really knows the student, and that comes through when we hear some of those stories.
Yeah, it's similar in some ways to the college essay, that it's about kind of showing and not just telling, and that it's about the anecdotes and is that really bring it to life, as opposed to yeah, you can't fit your entire life story into your college essay, but you can give us a really vibrant snapshot of something in your life. And these recommendations don't need to be exhaustive of who you are, but as long as they kind of highlight qualities and give us a story, that's what we're looking for. So
Tom, this is a lot of words, and I already heard that we read 30 to 50 applications in a day. Do you really read everything, all of these letters, no matter how many there are?
I mean, we have to. Yeah, it would be doing a disservice to students if we picked and chose which letters of recommendation we read. So yeah, I mean, we've gotten pretty good, I would say, at speed reading in some ways. Like, you know, you have to, it took me a while, probably a year at Holy Cross, before I felt really confident in being a competent reader. But yeah, we absolutely read every document that's submitted. And what we're looking at now is what we would call a parent or guardian recommendation. These are by no means a requirement, but we've found that, you know, parents and guardians do want to be involved in their children's college admission process many times. And this is just an outlet to add some additional information and anecdotes from other parts of your life, and not just who you are within a school community, but also who you are within a family, and yeah, who you've been as a member of that family over the years. So Lynn, what value do you think these parent recommendations add for us as something that we offer?
I think, I mean, as a parent, I know that I just know my own children in a way that no one else ever will. And I think a lot of students roll their eyes when they know that we'll invite their family members to submit letters. A lot of parents, I think, are very surprised. And frankly, I think a lot of admission officers at other schools would roll their eyes as well. I know it's not something that all colleges want to see, because, you know, it's of course you're going to say nice things, right? Of course you're going to brag. So it's not about, you know, are you going to say nice things or not? Because we expect you likely will. It's what are you saying? What are you telling us about the student? And this is not the decision maker. So we don't admit a student because their parents said something nice about them, but it just really helps. In the cases we get these letters, it can sometimes just give us a fuller picture. So it's a different perspective that we welcome. There are plenty of students who do not have family members who submit these letters, and they're certainly not at any disadvantage. But where you have a family member who would like to submit, we see letters from siblings in some cases as well, particularly if the siblings attended or is attending Holy Cross. It's just another perspective. So I think that's really the value.
All right, so we've now seen, for first year applicant example, our student that we're reading through, we've seen what the transcript says about them and what others have to say about them. So now we're kind of diving into more of the personal details here and what we've gotten to know about the student. So Holy Cross is an institution that values admission interviews. And this is a chance for a representative of the college to meet individually with an applicant. So our colleague Nicole sat down with this faux applicant and was able to chat with them for 20 to 30 minutes and talk about their high school experience and things that they're involved in, that they're passionate about, what it is that they're looking for in a college community. So we while we don't take notes during the conversation, we do capture the essence of the chat afterwards, and try to add things that would not be found elsewhere in their application that was unearthed during this conversation. So this is a pretty standard length of a summary after that 20 to 30 minute chat, and really, I think, adds some great life and color to a student's application, and yeah, brings them to life in some ways. It's like Nicole is calling this person into the room as we're reading their application and allows them to speak up for themselves. So Lynn, what do you think, this kind of in the middle of the sandwich of the tabs on the left, what do you think the interview notes can add to a student's file?
Oh, wow. Well, it's a chance. We can read about you in your application, but when we get to experience you, to have a conversation with you, it's a totally different experience. So whether this evaluation is done by a staff member, by a student. We have student volunteers who do interviews for us, or an alumnus who volunteers to do interviews. There's someone who's affiliated with the college who we know and whose opinion we trust, who's going to give us their impression of you. So, and it's a first impression, and we know that, right? So there's a difference between getting a recommendation from somebody who's been your teacher for 2 years, from your parent who's known you since you were born. And then we have this sort of snapshot of this is the experience of somebody who's talked to you right now, as a high school senior who's getting ready to apply to colleges. So it can add so much. And these, just like recommendations, these are most useful when we ask great questions, when we allow you to speak, when we ask good follow-up questions. So we can't have good write-ups without good interviews. So we hope you all have a great experience of having, and we say good interview, it means that we ask you probing questions. We get you to open up and talk to us a little bit. I really have not seen cases that interviews hurt students. I think that even when a student is maybe a little less talkative, or doesn't have as much to say, a lot of times we chalk that up to nerves. So as long as you come in and you're willing to have a conversation, you're not outright rude or disrespectful, and just totally unwilling to share anything, then this is just a really nice sort of different kind of insight into you as a person. And you have a lot of control in the interview. So in terms of what you'd like to talk about, and ideally those things are reflected here in the evaluation. I would say, and Tom, tell me if you agree, when we get to committee and we have access to this reader sheet that the readers have filled out, but we still have access to this whole application, interviews are absolutely at the very top of the list that the committee is most likely to say, can we see X, Y, or Z, right? It's, can we see the interview? Can we look at the transcript? Can we see the essay? Those tend to be the things that we look at most as a group. We absolutely will pull up a recommendation letter or look at other pieces. But those are the things that the committee often wants to see again, read through again. So despite the fact that I've only, typed in 2 sentences that I pulled out as a snapshot from this evaluation, it will live on, and the readers and the committee members will see it probably more than once.
Yeah, we'll definitely dig into that oftentimes. Mature and thoughtful. I appreciated his willingness to try new things. I think that sums up a lot of what was captured here. But as counselors who are going to have follow-up questions, what are those new things that the student wants to try? So yeah, at that point, we'll dive into this and give it a read together. The time to really read through all of this.
There is a question in the chat about whether we consider demonstrated interest and if that's recorded somewhere. The answer to that is yes. And the next parts that we're getting into is really the answer to where and how those pieces are recorded. So we can probably move right into this HC response.
Sure. And I would say the interview itself is the highest form of demonstrated interest. It takes a certain leap of faith and some bravery and courage to put yourself out there and to be willing to have a conversation with an adult representative of the college. This HC response is, once again, it's an optional piece of our application. It simply asks 2 questions. You can either answer one, both, or none at all. You'll see the first one: in what ways have you been able to learn about Holy Cross? And oftentimes, especially this year, it was helpful when a student would let us know, I drove through campus and was able to walk around a little bit and see the ground. So that was not a formal admission event, but it gives us a sense of a student's interest in the college and the fact that they've actually put their feet on the ground. So that often allows us to learn about interests that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. And then there's that other question too: is there any additional information that you care to share? And that can be anything at all. That is wide ranging in what students want to communicate to us. But it just allows students to let us know how they've come to learn about Holy Cross, as well as if there's any context that we should know about in terms of their high school experience. So Lynn, what do you look for in these HC responses?
Yeah, so, and we do, to answer the question, we do keep track of, certainly if you have an interview, if you come and register for a campus tour, if we see you when we're traveling, all of those things, we're aware of those, and we'll see in a moment where that's recorded. But this first question is really a chance for a student. A student doesn't need to tell us in this first question, I came to your open house, I came to the webinar, because we know those things, but it's a chance if you visited on a time that we were closed, or you have a neighbor who's been telling you about Holy Cross since you were, this high and playing with, their kid in the yard. And you don't have to make those things up if they don't exist in your life, but it's a chance for us, because we know for a variety of reasons, not every person is going to be logged into this webinar or visiting our campus. There are constraints of money, time, family support, all of those other things. So we don't want to make it so that all the students who can get to campus are going to be favored in the process, and those who are not able to do that can't. We also know that some students find Holy Cross later in the process than others. So this is a chance for us, if we're scratching our heads and saying, why are you applying? We're not even sure why, why have you identified us as a fit? Because we know so many students know we're a good fit because they've done some research, they've come on campus, and maybe you tell us something that, it was your dentist. We actually hear that a lot, or your teacher, that your teacher is a Holy Cross alum and won't stop talking about Holy Cross. Those are relevant things, that are part of your college search. So it's a chance to just sort of fill in some gaps that exist. This last piece, there are other places to add sort of additional information, whether you email us, whether it's on the additional information section of the application, you talk about it in your interview, but because this form is filled out a little bit later in the process, not until after you've applied, it is a nice chance if there's something that's come up, so something you forgot to include in your application or talk about it in your interview, or just something that's changed or evolved, then it's certainly something you can include here. So this only can sort of add a little bit of additional information, and it's okay if you don't have anything to share here.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I guess moral of the story is if you think we're going to be scratching our heads and wondering, help us out, fill out the HC response to let us know. But I think for students that are attending a webinar, they might be, hopefully after this, they'll sign up for an interview if they're a senior, and the HC response won't even be needed necessarily. So this third to last tab here just has one document on it, and it's an email that was sent to our colleague Nicole, who this student interviewed with, and just thanking her for her time. So we do have the ability to kind of capture correspondence, and once again, this can allow us a look into how a student has learned about Holy Cross and the individuals at the college that they've talked to along the way. So there's sometimes like relevant information in here, but not all the time. Sometimes it's just, I forgot my password to my account. Can you help me out here? Or did you receive my recommendations? But we certainly will look through, and nice to know that the student had a great conversation with Nicole and took the time to send a thank you note. Penultimate tab here. And just gives us a sense of the events that a student has attended. So this individual attended one of our junior advisory seminars and registered for a spring information session. Maybe did not get seen in the check-in process, or maybe wasn't able to attend. But this contact box kind of allows us to know the different events that students have attended. So if and when you were to apply to Holy Cross, which we hope you do, this very webinar would be on this page here to let us know that you were here for episode 5 of our summer mini series. And yeah, go ahead.
So we know that you attended the session where we told you that you should really have an interview, right?
That is true. We will say, I remember mentioning interviews and they don't have an interview. And I saw questions about the interview in the Q&A, so I can answer that while we're on the topic. It is one of those things, like when you apply to a job, you wait to be contacted before you get to interview. But with college, it kind of happens reverse oftentimes, where the interview is part of the search process. It's like a tour or information session. It's a way to continue learning about the college and showing interest. But I would say a lot of students actually interview before they apply. You can certainly apply and then interview, but there's no particular order that it needs to happen in. But we've now, oh, sorry, Lynn.
I was just going to tick through a couple really quick questions that are in the chat. One, which I think is a great question. They're all great questions, but asking if the tabs we have on the left here, if these are sort of in priority order. And they're not in priority order, meaning that we value the transcript more than the recommendation, and that's valued more than the interview, and that the application is the least important, but they're just in an order so that every application we read is read in the same order. Because we read 30, 40, 50 applications in a day, it really is helpful to be able to go from what we consider sort of beginning to end of an application. It also means that when we're in our committee and we want to see what did the school counselor say, what did your essay say, that this read is really done in that same order. So we can draw our eyes right to the thing that we're looking for. We're not searching for the information. So we certainly, as we built this process out, we thought about, when we read applications, when we read paper applications, what made sense to read the most, right? So what did we want to know first about the student, and what would be the, as Tom said, sort of the cherry on top, the application and the essay. So we did intentionally order these, but it's what we think is sort of a sensical way to review an application, but not with the things at the top being more valued than the things at the bottom. So I think that is a really good point, but it really helps our process to be consistent in how we read applications. And then the other one I think is important is a question about if early decision changes this process. The only change is the timing. So in ED, the process happens earlier, and the first read happens, the second read happens, and then committee happens all kind of in a row. Whereas in regular decision, we're a little later in the calendar year. All of the first reads happen in sort of a discrete time, and then all of the second reads happen, and then committee happens. So it's a little bit of a longer period of time, but same process, first read, second read, committee, regardless of how or when you apply.
Yeah, and we have referred to admission work in the past as half art, half science. And I think part of the science, there needs to be some order here, but then the art is what information each counselor captures ultimately. So we've arrived at the application, and this is what we'll see as you're typing into either your common application or your coalition application. This is demographic information. So there's a lot listed here. The next page is going to be about family members. We'll have information about a student's high school, and their schedule. So this is information that we've certainly seen already, as well as any honors or awards, future plans. So this is where the AP subject tests or the AP tests live. So as we said, this student said no to testing, but we do view AP and IB tests because they're part of a course as a separate entity. So we might enter these scores into the AP score box up above. And then we're getting into the extracurricular section. So students are able to let us know what kind of activity this is, how many years they've been involved, what a time commitment it is, the title, the location, and a short description. So this is almost a resume in some ways, and you'll see that Lynn just posted in the comments box a summary, a quick summary of everything that's listed here. VP of the Pre-Medical Society, the student is part of what we think is the anti-bullying club. They happen to list the Ant-Bullying Club, different service opportunities, tour guide, family responsibilities. So, and I think that's a good note too, is that extracurricular activities don't have to just happen within a school setting or in community service. If you work a part-time job or a full-time job or look after younger siblings, that's a great place to list that information as well, and is just as important as anything else. So really, however you fill your time is outside of being a student is what we're curious to learn more about. This is the essay section that we were just on. So that once again is written in Latin, but we'll certainly scour. This is our favorite part of reading a student's essay or reading a student's application. I think pretty much across the board, we all really enjoy the effort that students put in and what it is that they decide to tell us about. And in this student's essay, apparently it's about learning to tie his shoes, and this reader thought it was really creative and well written. This is something that will continue on for us for the next little bit. The community disruption or the COVID response. So giving us a sense of how the last year and a half impacted this student, not a requirement because it impacted all of us, but if you feel as though there's something that is really important to communicate directly to admission committees, this is a nice place to do it. And I think it allows students the freedom of not having to write about the pandemic in their actual personal statement. And then this last page just has some kind of final information. Students select majors at Holy Cross, so every student is entering undeclared, but this is a piece of curiosity that sometimes we'll say, I wonder what this student is interested in studying. So there are three main interests here are biochem, biology, and rhetoric and composition. So students are able to select up to three academic interests and communicate that to us. And this is something that I don't think we had seen elsewhere in the application, that their cousin was an attendee or a grad of Holy Cross. So something that we might note in the application. Then finally, this bottom line that Lynn just entered is, I would view as like a too long didn't read on Reddit. And once again, we do read, but it's like before you hit submit and send it to the next reader or send it to committee, try to boil it down to a sentence. Like, what's your impression of this student? And after all of this work, after 45 minutes of reading through this application, Lynn thinks this is a hardworking student with a great sense of humor. So that's the message that she's gotten. So Lynn, are we ready to send it along to the second reader?
Yeah, let's do it. And there's a good question in the chat asking about what if the readers disagree?
That is a good question. It happens.
Yeah, so I mean, disagree in the sense of both readers will assign 2 ratings to a file. There's an academic rating that would mostly factor in the transcript, test scores if they've been submitted, the writing quality in the essay, maybe information from recommendations. And then there's also personal ratings. So that would be more things that came up through leadership or extracurricular involvement, an interview, also the story that we've heard in an essay. It's rare that either rating will be drastically different. We generally tell readers that if your rating is off by more than 1 point from the first reader, that you should sort of sit down and have a conversation. Sometimes the second reader finds new information, or they find a mistake that the first reader made. So if there is a really big difference of opinion, the readers would sit down and would have a conversation and figure out who maybe had missed something. But at the end of the day, when we get to committee, we might see that one reader thought the essay was really, really good and the other one thought it was just okay. Or one reader really didn't like the essay and the other thought that it was fine. But then we say, let us be the judge. And as a committee, we will look at those things. So the readers really don't have to agree. And we actually don't want both readers to say exactly the same thing. We don't want them to pull out the same quotes. We don't want them to have exactly the same opinion. That's really why we do more than one read.
What does the second reader do? What's their role in this process?
Yeah. So I've moved this file into the second read bin. So the only difference, the reader still sees all these tabs, but now they see a new tab that says review form. So now as the second reader, I can see the comments that the first reader made, and I would kind of do a cursory glance to make sure that I'm not writing exactly what they already wrote. And I would also see, in theory, it didn't carry through in this case for this test example, but all of the things that the reader added in, in terms of the courses and the grades, that would be pre-populated. So as a second reader who is the expert on this school, a second reader would be the person who visits your school or is responsible for your school. I would be the person to correct any mistakes that maybe the first reader made, something they misunderstood about your school or about the courses offered. And then I would do exactly the same thing that the first reader did. For some of the things that we talked about in the first read, we didn't add comments. So say that parent recommendation, maybe it wasn't available or it hadn't come in yet when the first reader had read it. So even though this reader read through the counselor recommendation and the teacher recommendations and maybe would add some comments, it would be most important for them to add in comments for anything that was new. So that Holy Cross response form has come in since the first time the application was read. So the reader would make sure that they took a good look at that and they made some comments about it.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a different process, but yeah, you're kind of the subject matter expert on this student's school group, whereas the first read is intentionally randomized and often just based on an alpha split. This is the schools that we get to know well over years. So we all have, years of experience with each individual school. And the second reader doesn't have to capture every single document that the first reader talked about, but yeah, any new information that comes through. And now all of this gets translated into what we call the dashboard. So on the left side, you'll see now there's going to be 2 review forms and 1 dashboard. And this is our summary, our cheat sheet in some ways as to what is contained in this entire file. So this is what we look at when we're in our admission committee. This is put on a big projector on a wall. And I have to say, my first committee meeting, people were talking so quickly and like, scrolling around, and it takes your eyes a little bit to warm up and to know where to look for things. But you get the hang of it pretty quickly.
And then as promised, we still have access to everything here. So we take a moment, we take all of this in, we have some discussion, and then very quickly someone will say, can we look at that interview or look at the essay that those readers really liked or whatever it might be. And then we can make a decision and move the file along from there. I know that we have a number of questions as we close in on 8 o'clock. If we want to try to, I know one of them was about a question about a first generation student. So as you can see, it's up in red here at the top of the file. This example is a student who is a first generation college student. That's one of several things that we would flag in an application, and we put it sort of in this prominent place, so we're aware of it. So there are other categories. It doesn't drastically change the decision we make, but it is certainly something that we want to be conscious of or aware of if a student is part of a certain population. So first gen is one of those examples.
I see a question. There's a couple here that we can answer pretty succinctly, I think. Where would admission counselors view extra documents like resumes or other recommendation letters? For other recommendation letters, that will be in that recommendations tab that we were in. So you can have as few as 2 recommendations. The only ones that are required are a counselor rec and a teacher rec, as we call them in shorthand, but there can be pages and pages and pages of recommendations, which is not preferred necessarily. Hearing from a couple of people who know you well is what we prefer there.
Yeah, we do have another tab that's a resume tab. This student doesn't happen to have a resume. But yeah.
And then, are you going to release new interview dates? When I looked on the website, I did not see any available times. Absolutely. We can't be talking about interviews and then not let you sign up. So more to come. It'll be, if you were to type in admission interviews Holy Cross into Google or look on our admission page on our website, you'll definitely be able to see where interviews are booked. And I would guess pretty soon we'll have those interviews up.
Yeah, next couple of weeks. Let's see here.
There was just
do we prefer to see a more well-rounded student or a student with a clear focus? So you can't change which of those things you are, right? So it's a little bit of a difficult question because first of all, we're not going to say this is what we want to see, because first of all, we don't want every student to be the same. And we don't want you to morph into that thing that we want to see, right? So we see both things. If you are that well-rounded student, then we want to know about all the things you're involved with. If you are that student more with that clear focus, we're going to want you to maybe spend a little bit more time elaborating. So your extracurricular page might just say dance, or it just might say soccer, or it might just say that you have a part-time job. But we'd like to hear a little bit more about those things. So if you spend the majority of your time doing 1 or 2 things versus sort of dabbling in all these other things, just spend some time giving us some detail about that thing. Whereas if you're more involved across the board, you can give maybe a little bit about each thing, but it's still really nice to hear when a student is passionate about something. So it's really, we want a full picture of you and who you are. So it can fall into either of those categories or somewhere in between. Can you have a personal and school email listed on your application? You can provide more than one email address. We actually don't recommend school addresses because they are much more sensitive to spam filters. Sometimes you won't get our emails at a school address. And then once you've graduated, we might be contacting you over the summer at an address that you no longer have access to. So unless your school has a policy that they really want you to use your school address, I would recommend you use a non-school address as long as it's one that you're actually going to monitor and keep an eye on.
Then last question here for tonight that's currently open. If a straight A student posted a couple of Bs in their junior year, the question may have disappeared, but you know, how would admission counselors view that in the context of the pandemic? I believe, yeah, a year of remote learning. How do we take that into account? I know colleges don't like to see any dip in junior year grades. Yeah, if that is you, you are not alone. Remote learning was difficult on everyone, I would say, and I think there's going to be some leniency and understanding and flexibility on our part in that regard. And as we said in the application itself, in the Holy Cross optional response, there are a lot of different ways to communicate to us how things affected you. And we, as I hope you have seen tonight, we are human beings with feelings, and we feel for you and understand that your high school experience was very much disrupted. So I think there would be a recognition there that before the pandemic, this was a straight A student, and a couple of Bs were likely the result of the difficulty of remote learning. Lynn, anything to add there?
Yeah, just that, you know, we're human beings. The people who read your applications are me. They are Tom. They are, you know, our colleagues who are like us in some ways and unlike us in other ways. But, you know, we are human beings who have lived through this experience as well. And while we don't know exactly what it has meant to you or how challenging it's been to you, it's not a stretch for us to understand that a year or more of remote learning and, you know, removal from social situations and challenges of online learning and all those things have had an impact. So it's not our job to find a reason to say no to you and to your application. It's our job to get to know you and to understand you, and to try to find students who we think will enhance the life of the college and benefit from what we have to offer. And we'll be successful at Holy Cross. And having a B or having a semester where you've really challenged is not evidence enough to us that you could not be successful at Holy Cross. We cannot admit every student who's qualified. So we make some really tough decisions, but we're not here to try to penalize you for something that's out of your control or just a really challenging situation. So we're not looking for excuses, but if you have a reason why, you know, you've really been challenged, we don't know. We are not mind readers. We read lots of applications. We know lots of things, but if your grades have suddenly really declined, we might make an assumption. Oh, it was, you know, sophomore year, spring. We might say, well, that was a challenging time in the pandemic, but we actually don't know. You know, if it's that you had a family situation going on, if you were ill, or if you just stopped doing your homework because you didn't feel like it. So it's helpful if there is something, again, that you think we might scratch our head or have a question, to answer that question for us before we have to ask it. So don't leave us to make assumptions in any part of your application. Give us information so we have the truth and the whole story. I know we have a couple of things we want to plug before we sign off. I will just say the application you saw tonight was an example of a common application. We do use the common application as well as the coalition application, either or, not both. And both are live now as of August 1st. I don't encourage you to rush out and try to submit immediately. You have plenty of time, but it's a good time to start to look, if you haven't already, familiarize yourself with the application, with the questions, and give yourself a lot of time to do some work on it, step away, come back to it. So as you wrap up, you know, the end of your summer, it's a good time to kind of get a look at those things. We do, of course, want to encourage interviews, and we expect to have those times on our website within the next couple of weeks. We'll start in early to mid-September doing interviews. And Tom, we've got some other webinars coming up as well, right?
Yeah, financial aid focused. I know there's some questions in the chat about financial aid, and our colleagues who work in that office are going to be hosting some wonderful webinars that are hopefully very informative for students and get you geared up for the process. Lynn, it was great to spend this time with you tonight, and thankful for our audience that stuck around for an hour. We can't spend this much time on every application, but you know, getting to go through the process and explain it to others was really enjoyable, and hopefully it was beneficial for everyone in attendance.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks everyone for joining.
Have a good night.